Right. Okay. We are going to get started. A very good morning to you all. Welcome to the Chamber's Policy Roundtable. This is one of a series of roundtables that we run throughout the year, looking at particular pieces of legislation and policy that have been brought forward by the government or are being asked for consultation and feedback. And obviously, great opportunity for you as businesses to give us feedback and content that we can then share with the government and with the British Chambers of Commerce. My name, for those of you that know me, I'm Tudor Price. I'm the Chief Exec here at the Kent and Medway Chamber of Commerce. Seating to my left on your screen is Phil Galpin. Phil is our policy lead and also looks after some of our business support projects as well. If you ever have any issues or concerns that you want to the Chamber to sort of represent your interests on, please always do get in touch with us. The email address for that is policy@kentinvictachamber.co.uk, which is in the chat there. So we've introduced who we are. We are going to be here for the next hour and a half. So 12 o'clock is our end time. So we have time to get into some of the weeds and some of these matters. The format for those that haven't participated in one of these roundtables is we'll give you a little bit of context in a moment just to sort of set the scene and to try and put some parameters around the nature of the conversation, because obviously it can be quite broad. We will then ask you some questions. Those questions we will invite you to score on a scale of 1 to 5 based on sort of low to high. Once we have on scored using the chat feature, we will then invite some of those people who have put in a high or a low score to add some further narrative and then just open the conversation up a little bit more. And we'll go through the whole of the session with that format. After each question, we will sort of have a bit more of an in-depth discussion. Specifically, we're looking for real examples that we can take back. So the information that we will be doing here, so we're going to be recording all the information so we have it down for notation and collaboration later. We will also be feeding back your scores from this session here to the British Chambers of Commerce. So they will aggregate that with other chambers around the country to look at where the key trends and issues are, and obviously feed that back into government. We will also make our own submission here at Kent and Invicta Chamber as a collective into the consultation, but you are also welcome, obviously, still to put in your own feedback direct through the government consultation pages, and we'll provide a link for that before the end of the session. I think that's probably everything to say here. Yep, pretty much. So a little bit about the context here. Specifically, we're talking about the national living wage. And again, forgive me for teaching some of you to suck eggs, but I will just cover off the basics here to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the national minimum wage applies to people between the ages of 18 and 20. This is excluding apprenticeships. Minimum for that is £10.85 currently. The national living wage, which applies to those that are 21 plus, and that is currently at £12.71, again, excluding any apprenticeships. And then there is also in the background the real living wage, which is not mandatory, but is recommended by various foundations out there, currently running at £13.45. The government's stated aim is to align the 18 to 20-year-old rate with that of the national living wage. So essentially, the national minimum wage, again, excluding apprenticeships, will become the national living wage. Everyone will essentially be on the same thing. Now, the Low Pay Commission are the body that are advising government on how to do this. The two major considerations that they have at their disposal is one around the timing as to when these changes are made. And also they do have a concern around the impact it has on potential recruitment/employment. So they can make changes based on the advice they're getting. But the government's commitment at this stage is to align all of this. Rough idea of timings really is that by the time we get to 2028, everything will be aligned in theory. Now, this is an opportunity for you as employers to provide some feedback through us so that we can talk to government and tell them some of the concerns and issues and some of the impact that we'll have. We're looking for real world examples. Okay. So try to avoid the words I think, rather go for I know would be much more helpful. And this is the situation that we're experiencing so that we can capture that and make sure that sort of case study goes back. The wider challenge around the whole ideology of the low pay commission and national minimum wage, for those of you that are economic wonks, it's Keynesian economics at play here. There are four key sectors they're looking at: protect exploitation of workers, government intervention into the private market, free market enterprise, reducing inequality between the sort of higher wages and the lowest wage, narrowing the gap. And of course, more recently, given the NEET situation, making work pay. So it should be more beneficial to be in work than it should be to be on benefits. There are lots we could talk about that for hours and hours, but that's not what we're here to do today. We are here specifically to talk about the proposed change and alignment of the national living wage and how that is impacting. So what I'd like to do is kick off with the first question. So just to remind you what we're looking for, I'll ask the question. You just simply use the chat feature to score 1, 2, 3, or 5. 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree. I'll read out a statement, you put in the score, and then we will come to you and ask you to expand on why you're saying that in particular. Now, the first question, if you're ready, is very broad, and I expect this is going to be a fairly obvious outcome, but we'll still ask the question nonetheless to be complete and comprehensive. So the statement is, in the April 2026 national living wage increase has had a significant impact on our business. So 1 for strongly disagree, 5 for strongly agree. Please vote now. Excellent. As expected, some high numbers coming in here. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on the call, which makes absolute sense, of course. I should say, obviously, the Employment Rights Act is also running alongside this in the background. That is a separate conversation, so I'm sure we'll touch on it today because the two can't be unlinked. Likewise, the national insurance contributions increase also has a part to play, but we're looking specifically at the national living wage for the purposes of this roundtable. Brilliant. Some high scores there straight away. Claire, you were the first one to Danielle, beg your pardon. Danielle, you were the first one to respond. So could I ask you to come off? Yeah, your thoughts. What sort of impact has that?
Hi, yeah. So yeah, we're a recruitment business, and a big chunk of the work that we do is into industrial employers, so pack houses, manufacturing plants, processing plants, and the majority of those people are on national minimum wage. So it's had a massive effect, as it does every year when there's an increase, to be fair, but in the last couple of years more so, because people are having to be even more conscious of the temporary labour that they're using. They're having to be a lot more lean. It's costing them obviously a huge amount. We're having to negotiate harder than ever before so that we're not taking reductions in the margins. 9 times out of 10, we end up having to reduce our margins slightly. And then the gap the gap between, if you're a production worker working on a line to if you're a supervisor, has got smaller and smaller. Because, well, once upon a time they were on 2, 3, 4 pounds more, and now they might only actually be on like 75 pence more than what they were. So that's also having a knock-on effect. A lot of people are going, well, why take the stress and the worry of being a team leader and a supervisor? And, a team leader and a supervisor when I could just pack on the line for sort of 50p less.
Yeah, I think the low pay commission refers to that as compression, I think, is the language we're using. So differentiation is also another one, but compression seems to be the vocabulary. Okay.
So for us, a lot less, less bookings, less margin and less bookings. So having to work harder to find.
I'll come back to those two points specifically later on to see how anyone else is doing here. Let's have James, obviously James from Eastwell Manor. We know you well. James, long recorded challenges with this particular thing. It's obviously had a major impact on you. Could you just expand a bit more?
Yes, yeah, it certainly has. It's added the best part of 70 grand onto my payroll bill, which is coming out of nowhere except my bottom line. What it's doing is, again, similar to Danielle from a compression perspective, is it's getting to the point now where we have to consider whether we are removing an entire line of our structure. You may remember we did that 4 years ago, I think it was, and I explained at that point the impact. We're now having to look about whether or not we do that again, because I've got supervisors who are on 40p more than the people they're supervising, and it's just not feasible. People aren't willing to take that responsibility any further. So it's forcing us to look at completely restructuring the business. Continuing along this path is going to force us into a position where we have to look at the scale of our business. We're in quite a difficult position as a hotel operator, in that because we have multiple buildings and our operation is quite disparate. We have to look at the feasibility of operating those lower profitability buildings, or whether we need to shrink the size of our operation to improve the profitability and the efficiency of it. And that's obviously not something that we want to even explore, but it's rapidly coming onto the horizon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, we're going to
for us.
Thank you. We'll dig into those a little bit more. I'm just going to come to Millie. Millie, you've scored a 3 there. Obviously, not a major impact. What line of work are you in?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
my line is a bit. Okay. We're currently in the charity sector. So I work for Young Lives Foundation in Maidstone, and the service that I coordinate is our care leaver service. So young people from 18 to 25 that we work alongside. And we're currently trying to look at expanding our sort of careers and employment, and trying to encourage young people to get into work, and sort of that's going to that line. And I think, I don't know, I'm speaking maybe from a different view.
Absolutely. No, it's great. It's great to have a different perspective on this. Yes.
Yeah, I think the increase is a positive thing, and obviously that's something that's great for our young people to sort of be encouraged. But I think for our young people, there is other multiple barriers getting them into work, and I know that's obviously separate to what we're talking about today. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a small factor into their decision, rather than completely making their mind up about going into a line of work. I think there's other sort of barriers for them, and they've expressed that to us as well. So
that's great. Thank you. Okay, again, we'll come back to some of these points later on. Claire, we've got you down. You scored a 4 on this. Again, what do you guys do, and how does this impact?
Hiya. So yeah, it was a 4 because it's just the jump from being an apprentice to going on to the national minimum wage is quite a big jump. As soon as they come out their first year, they do go up quite significantly, and we do try and employ apprentices all the time. So just from that point of view, it's not ideal.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I'm going to ask you the next question here. Now, obviously, that very broad question, and a lot of you have touched on some of the topics in particular that we're going to ask details. But again, the reason we're going to go down into a bit more, drill down into the detail now, and ask you specifically around things is we encourage you that to sort of give us some real world examples of things you've had to do, so that we can take that away and add that to the conversation. So your next question really is looking at financial pressures, and again, we've touched on this briefly. So specifically, the statement here is the increase has materially reduced our profit margins. Now, again, 1 where you strongly disagree, 5 where you strongly agree. So has the increase in April 2026, have you had to make a change, and has it materially reduced your profit margin? Can you vote now, please? Because, of course, many of you may have just passed that cost on direct to your customers. Others have felt they've had to absorb it for competitive reasons. Wow. Gosh, okay. Right. That's always the hardest pill to swallow, is the profits. Daniel Giuseppe, down there in Folkestone, how are you?
Morning, Tudor. Yeah, I'm good. I'm in Canterbury at the moment, actually, but
Oh, of course, Abbotsbarton. Very nice
yeah, I'm at
too.
the Abbots. Yeah, I'm not at the Burlington today, but I
So you've
mean,
actually had you haven't been able to pass that cost on directly then.
no chance.
Right.
Absolutely no chance. I mean, same, it's exactly what James said earlier. We've been having this conversation for a few years now within the industry and within the local hoteliers in Kent about the challenge of trying to pass anything on at all at the moment, whether that's accommodation, whether that's on the food and drink side of things in hospitality. It's really, really price sensitive. I think we are on average achieving similar average room rates to what we were doing 2 or 3 years ago. And even though you put your prices up in the bar with your drinks and with your food, the reality is that again our sales are relatively flat. So these increases in the wages are a direct erosion of profits. There's no two ways about it. We are unable to increase our sales in line with the increases of the minimum wage, and that's been the exact scenario for the last few years now. I mean, so we can come on to other things later. I'm sure you're going to talk
Yeah.
about. We're looking into other productivity ways, using technology, using other things, and
Mm.
trying, the whole discussion of looking at the younger generation, de-skilling in certain areas. But I mean, if you want to come on to those later, we
We
can.
will do. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
come back to it at the moment, Daniel. Daniel, thank you very much indeed. David, again, manufacturing there in Chart Sutton, Staplehurst. Uh, direct impact on him on profits.
Yeah, I mean, that's just simple arithmetic, isn't it? If the middle bit of our profit and loss is taking more money, there's less on the bottom.
Yeah,
But I think it's too narrow to think of this topic in purely those terms.
it
There's
is.
so
It's
many
difficult.
moving
Yeah,
parts here. And you quoted a bit of Keynesian stuff at the beginning there, but a lot of this is the fundamentals of supply and demand.
yeah.
Interested to hear the comments about hospitality trade there. Whilst I'm sat now in Birmingham up at the NEC, having faced the most exorbitant hotel costs that you can imagine, £600-700 a night, and they can because the demand is massive. So, those factors have to come into it, and the demand for young people in employment is a symptom of there aren't enough jobs. Anything to do with the NEETs agenda, it has to be aimed surely at achieving economically beneficial employment.
Mm.
And that's actually where there's not enough because, we've exported so many of the jobs in manufacturing to the Far East. We need to reshore the jobs, create the demand. And quite frankly, I expect to pay people well if they do a good job. So it's not the employment cost, it's the demand we're going to look at.
I think this is where the sort of the ideology behind Keynesian economics really is around that sort of the free market enterprise works very much on supply and demand, which is the point you're making there.
Yeah.
The flip side to that is that there needs to be sort of government intervention because free market enterprise may not necessarily protect employment. But I think again there's an ideology at place here. But I think you're absolutely right. The supply and demand is certainly in play, and we can't ignore the fact that there are many other elements and levers that are at play here. As again mentioned, the national insurance contribution increase, of the taxation on businesses, the sort of the NEET issue as well we're facing. Why is that? And there's a whole host of others. And again, in that point 4, we referenced around the fact that sort of being in work needs to be paying better than it does to be on benefits. Well, you put one up or you take the other one down. You have two ways to balance that particular equation. Again, very much a sort of political ideology and philosophy at play here. David, thank you. I'm going to come back to Danielle. You were in recruitment there, and I was just curious to know. You mentioned about having to negotiate hard with some of your clients. Now, have you actually had to reduce your profits as a result?
Yeah, so it's twofold, I suppose. One is that we obviously pass the cost on to our clients, and some of them will accept that and take that because it is what it is. They know that there's not a lot that they can do about it. But what tends to happen is they then will rejig their business or their demand for agency staff. So in effect, although we're making the same pounds per hour, we might be getting, I don't know, 40 hours less a week or whatever across the board. And then the other flip side of is those that just say, I can't, I know it's not your fault. I know what it is, but that will crucify me. I cannot afford to increase that. Or Joe Bloggs down the road is willing to do it for 50 pence less an hour than you are. I appreciate that you might be a great service provider, but my hands are tied. That's all I can kind of afford. So then you have a choice. You either meet it, which I really don't like to do, or you try and negotiate somewhere in the middle. So there are a handful that we've had to negotiate in the middle just to be able to save that business rather than lose it completely. And what that's meant internally is, I think someone, it's been mentioned there, is we've had to become more lean. So we've had to, get more out of what we've got, the staffing that we've got. We've had to become a lot more lean with the size of the office, the size of the staffing, sort of the things that we do, but still maintain that quality, because obviously we're in employment, we're supplying people, so it still needs to be completely above board. We need to have compliance needs to be so high, and with all the changes, the employment changes that are coming in, that's like an additional cost. So that's even more, so much more work that we've now got to do on that side as well. So it's just like everything is costing more and costing more and costing more. It's difficult to see where that respite is coming.
David's, again, sort of stated the obvious, really, which is simple maths, really, isn't it? That if you're increasing at the bottom but not at the top, then it's just going to erode whatever margins you've got. So yeah, it's very difficult to sort of try and see how that balances out. Millie, just going to come back to you briefly on this point. Obviously, you're sort of coming at it from a different angle. The people that you're helping to get into work, that obviously not affecting your profits, but is affecting their prospects. I guess, do they see that as a welcome, the sort of increase there, or do you see the profitability being a blocker?
Yeah, I think for us it's more about sort of kind of weighing up what for them, they're going to be sat maybe on universal credit or PIP, whatever they're entitled to. And I think for us it's to encourage them to go and get skills and get a career and think and more outside of the box. Now, obviously, the increase in the pay is obviously going to be a lot more beneficial for them. Some of them will still think that actually I'm just going to stay on universal credit and my PIP because actually I'm going to make more money doing that and not have to go to work. But I think for our sort of, from what we want to do is encourage sort of those skills and those experiences that you get from going into work, and thinking, wider rather than just thinking in the sort of the small box they're in at the moment. And I think another block that we have is getting them the skills that they can be independent to go and access these jobs. So, they may get a job, but it's about sustaining it and keeping it and turning up to those shifts or whatever, and not just sort of doing one and then going, oh, actually, no, I'm not, I don't fancy it today, and not sort of thinking about, being consistent. So I suppose those are the sort of things that we're constantly seeing with our young people at the moment.
Thank you, Millie.
No worries.
Another question for you in this, under the sort of financial pressures. Again, people have sort of talked briefly about this, but we want to specifically understand how significant this is. So the question, again, 1, strongly disagree, 5, strongly agree. Statement for you here. The cumulative effect of wage increases and wider employment costs is a major business challenge. So, is it going to potentially structure, impact on the way in which your business model operates, the way in which you go forward, so specifically? So again, 1 to 5, vote now. I'm going to come back to James on this because he's already touched briefly on the fact that he's having to rethink what they're doing and how they're moving forward. Excellent, thank you. I'm going to come to you first, James, because you talked about making. Is that a change to your your business plan, your strategic business plan? Is that significant, James?
It's getting there. That's not the case this year. At the moment, it is a change to our structures. This year at the moment, since the increase, we've seen an increase in our payroll percentage of about 2.5%. As of revenue, but over the last sort of 5 years, that's an increase of 8, nearly 9%, right, with the compound effect. So at the moment, it's still sort of an organizational structure, but if we're going to get to the point in the next 2 years where there is no difference in the young person's wage, and the lowest we're at is by that point going to be whatever, 13 pounds 20, something in that realm, then it is going to be a fundamental change to our business structure. It's going to be a change to the range of our offering. It's going to be, can we afford to continue with, and I'm just picking random examples out of the air, but things that are team heavy offerings, such as treatments, as one-to-one from a guest perspective, or do we need to look at dialing down the treatments? Now, that's obviously something that the brand and the hotel has been built upon. So it is very major considerations that we're talking about coming down the line in the next couple of years if something doesn't change. And it's amplified, not just the payroll costs in isolation. It's all the costs that are piling in and amplifying things to get us to that position. At the end of the day, we've got, over the last 6 years, we've gone from increasing our profitability quite nicely and our flow through to the bottom line to now in the last 2 years going backwards. And that's despite some growth in revenue not marrying up with the growth in costs. So it is forcing us to have conversations now about very fundamental changes to the structure of our business and beyond just the organizational structure.
Thank you, James. Peter Johnson, we've not spoken to you yet. Peter, you scored a 5 here. Again, you are looking to have to make changes, or the impact is having in your business is significant?
Yeah, the impact is significant. I run a laundry and cleaning company. We employ 34 staff. I would say over the last 6-7 years, because of the squeeze on differential pay rates that others have spoken about, now whatever the minimum wage goes up by, I just do the same percentage increase across all my different pay scales, because otherwise it's just narrowing it away for supervisors, drivers, etc. So that cost is quite heavy, combined with the national insurance contribution. That makes it harder. I mean, when you think, I've just made some notes. I have, in fact, on my whiteboard every year, I put what our national minimum wage is going up and what I'm putting my prices up by, because we do pretty much now pass the cost onto the customer, and sort of blame the national minimum wage for the increase. But what obviously happens is we get more and more expensive. Customers, instead of sending in weekly, send in fortnightly. The fortnightly customers send in monthly. The monthlies become sporadic and it drops off. I mean, I see in 24, the minimum wage went up by 9.8%, 25, 6.7%, 26 by 4.1%. So they're all well above inflation.
Indeed.
And now it is really starting to hurt. Probably the last 3 years, we've noticed it. Before, when the minimum wage went up, actually, we were doing quite well. We put it on, passed it on to the customers. But I think year after year, having such quite above inflation increases into our prices, people start thinking, well, actually, it's getting a bit expensive. I'll do a bit of laundry myself. I won't send it out. So yes, it is affecting the bottom. It is affecting the bottom line.
It is, Peter. Thank you. Just you mentioned a point there about the sooner, whatever the national minimum wage increases by, you apply that as a blanket rise across.
Well, yes.
Is there any qualifying to that at all?
Yeah. I mean, basically, whatever the national minimum wage goes up, 50% of my turnover is spent on wages.
Yes.
So I know this year, it went up 4.1%. So really, I've got to do a minimum just to stand still. I've got to do a 2% increase in my prices just to stand still before I take account of any other costs. This year was one of the lowest ones we've done because we're finding we are getting a bit price sensitive. We did a 3% increase. I wish I'd done more now with the cost of energy and diesel for my fleet of vans with what's happening in Iran.
Yes.
But I'm reluctant, as so many of my suppliers are doing to me, putting on surcharges for every pallet of soap or chemicals I have delivered. It's very difficult to do that to private customers, to say we're going to put a surcharge on. So it's just a question of next year in March, I'm going to look, perhaps I need to do a slightly larger rise than I did this year.
Yeah, I think that there's a common experience we've come across business to business. There doesn't seem to be as much of a concern around it passing that cost on, but business to consumer very much. And again, that's being echoed by certainly the hospitality. Could I just ask people to do a quick show of hands? So this is we can do this electronically. Again, find the raise hand bit. How many of you are applying a blanket rise to pay? Rather like Peter was referring to. So, because we did the same here at the Chamber, in order to keep that compression or differentiation in place, we saw how much the national minimum wage is going up by, and we applied that across the board to try and keep that gap. Quick show of hands for those who have done the same. Maybe did the same. Daniel. Okay, interesting. Interesting. I thought that would have been more. I guess probably because it's just lazy. I say lazy maths. I'm not going to say that of David and Daniel, of course, but it's a lot easier to apply that. But that keeping that differentiation in place, and the whole question then arises around inflation and how that knocks on. But again, we can get lost in the politics and philosophy of it all. Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. I'm going to move on to pay structure and impact. So we talked about the blanket application, so doing that sort of 4.1 in this case. But the question here is around whether or not you had to adjust your higher levels in order to keep that differentiation in place, or whether you just allowed that gap to narrow. So again, 1 strongly disagree, 5 strongly agree. The statement is, we have had to increase wages above the minimum to maintain pay differentials. So vote now. 5 if you strongly agree with that statement, or 1 if you don't. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to come across to Daniel because you scored a 1 on that, Daniel. As well as Danielle. Daniel. Interesting. So you've just let that gap narrow, really. You sort of brought it from the bottom up.
Yeah.
What were your concerns or deliberations about not doing that blanket rise?
I mean, we have tried to increase everybody's where possible, but we did look at every single layer, if you like, from other than the minimum wage, from above that to the mid managers, supervisors, and then management. And the increases were sort of different gaps of percentages on each tier, but ultimately the amount in between each one, the white space in between each layer has gone down, similar to what James was saying before. So now the difference is, like, in some cases you're talking 20 or 30p per hour more between one person and a supervisor, which of course is really difficult to when you have to recruit some people or have that conversation for the annual review. But ultimately, it's the only way that we've been able to at least give something. We've almost said in the letter, it's been a tough year again, and it's more of a gesture more than anything else, really. But we appreciate that it's it doesn't seem to be, the gap seems to be narrowing between those layers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Claire,
it's like James was saying, and it does mean that in some instances where it comes to someone leaving and looking at recruiting, we are actually considering almost getting rid of a layer.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I've got questions about recruitment and impact on that's having on retention or otherwise expansion. Claire, you scored a 2 on there. Again, you didn't feel there was too much of a risk by sort of leaving that gap and diminishing it?
No, not particularly. I mean, for us specifically, we have a lot of highly qualified engineers, so they're generally on a higher rate anyway. Generally a much higher rate than like newly qualified members of staff and such. So there's generally quite a large gap anyway. Most of the costs for us that actually impact the business would be like the newly qualified or generally stuff like materials, supplies that come in that have been increased in prices due to their wages gone up. But yeah, other than that, we've pretty much been able to keep everyone on a higher band or the higher brackets, keep them at the same. It hasn't really
And
impacted us.
you're in sort of electrical contracting and sort of things, aren't you? Is that your sort of line of work?
Yeah.
So is that common? Do you find that sort of similar amongst other people in the same sector, that you've got enough of a gap between national minimum wage?
I'm not entirely sure. I'd imagine that pays across the board for different contractors or subcontractors is roughly the same anyway. So I'd imagine they would be on the same bracket. But like I say, the major thing is actually like the newly qualified, where you generally have a fully qualified engineer. They'll go out with an apprentice or a newly qualified apprentice. And when pricing in jobs, then you'd price the engineer along with the apprentice, and having those prices already priced in makes it difficult when those prices that then rise up. Those costs to you end up rising up. You can't pass that cost on.
So this goes back to that profit margin being eroded by that sort of difference in the
Exactly.
two, where you've had to put that cost base up. Interestingly, you're obviously in that same area which David was referring to around the supply and demand, where you've got high skilled workers, and I guess that sort of keeps that fairly resilient in terms of the price point for both salary and for charging. Interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. I think we've got Peter. We know about your scoring. That's fine. Okay. Let's move on to another question. So, this deals really with around some of the way in which you're operating. We talked about, again, we've heard from James and Daniel about how they've sort of had to sort of look at how they're running their operations to see where they can find productivity gains and stuff like that. So the question really is around whether or not you've made any adjustments to your current staffing in certain areas. So that might be changing the hours, changing the roles rather, actually sort of reducing headcount. So if you've made any sort of structural changes to the staffing levels and operation, so the statement here that you're agreeing or disagreeing with, 1 strongly disagree, 5 strongly agree. So we have adjusted staffing, e.g. hours, roles or headcount in response to wage increases. So vote now. Have you actually made specific changes to either the operation or workforce? Interesting. Okay. So okay, there's a number of people have made practical changes here as well. I'm going to come to Danielle. So Danielle, what have you done? What's changed in terms of the
so there's our side, and then obviously there's our client side. So speaking from our side on the recruitment business, and this isn't just what's just happened now, it's been over the last sort of 18 months, closed an office, carried on operating, but brought them all into one area, made a couple of redundancies, some strategic changes around who does what, whether certain people can pick up other jobs, upskill them, sort of change people's roles and things like that. So yeah, quite a few drastic changes from us. And then on the client side, as I kind of already touched on, I mentioned earlier, a lot of them are reducing hours and reducing the number of staff. But what we've also seen is and again, it probably comes back to that compression, the differential between the lower rate and the higher rate, and also a skill set is, but things like, for example, line leaders, supervisors, production managers, that sort of role, they're finding it very difficult to find those sort of people because the salaries are so close to the lower band now.
Why take the responsibility if you're not getting
and if they have to increase that to attract new people in, then they've got to increase it for all the other people that do that job in their company. So that's obviously has that sort of knock-on effect. So what they're doing, a lot of them they are taking people on the lower rate with less responsibilities, training them, which is great. It's not a bad thing, but training those people and upskilling them to move into those roles and then just giving them a little bit extra and then having to backfill. So that's great, but productivity then takes a dip They're a lot less efficient. It takes longer. It still costs someone's time and money to train. So the training side, and that's great, but it just is it can be a more difficult route than being able to bring on people that have already got those skills and can do that job.
Danielle, thank you very much indeed. David, again, you've scored a 5 there, so you've had to make some changes, specifically around the operation.
So I think the changes, and this is ongoing, but the strategy for me will be different. The layer that we're going to eliminate is the lowest level, is the minimum wage level. My objective is to pay people as much money as we can, be a really good employer. And we do that by having the most valuable people who are the most productive people. The ones on the minimum wage aren't that yet. That's not to say they couldn't be one day, but they're the ones that, if you like, I can't afford. I'm going to plough it into the best people, pay them more. And that's the exasperation of sort of the second bit of this, the youth unemployment, because they probably are the least experienced and the least productive. But, there's only a certain number of well-paid jobs to go round, and they'll go to the best people.
Well, I can put in your score now for my question coming up in 2 minutes, which is about what's recruiting people under the age of 21. So I'll put you down as a 5 on that already.
I mean, let me just add,
Yes,
we have had some very good young people join us who would be sort of in that apprentice, but we very quickly pay them their worth, and we don't hold them at that lower level.
Yeah.
If we get a young guy who's immediately a talented welder, well, he's going to, excuse the phrase, get the man's wage straight away.
And I think fundamentally employers are generally trying to do the right thing. I don't think they recognise the need to protect people from exploitative practices, but generally speaking, I think most employers that we deal with, certainly here at the Chamber, invariably trying to do the right thing. Where was I going to come with this one? I wanted to look at so James, in terms of some of the changes that you've made around operations hours, bits and pieces, I think you've alluded to some of them, but again, just for clarity and for the transcription purposes, could you just explain a bit more about what those changes involve?
Sure. So it fundamentally comes down to looking at the way our supervisory layer or junior manager layer has been structured, where typically we've run with heads of department, assistant managers, supervisors, then line staff. What we've ended up doing is removing the supervisor and the assistant manager, taking both those layers out completely and putting into place one duty manager role. And we've done that across 4 of our operating departments. The intention is that we're able to provide a progression route for the guys coming in at the bottom, and that duty manager route or that duty manager role is somebody willing to take on additional responsibility, but on with a broader sort of perspective to the operation than they might have done historically. So rather than taking a departmental specific view to their day-to-day, that responsibility then incorporates other elements of the hotel. So they will, for example, pick up the firewalks or the duty manager checks that will take them outside of the restaurant or outside of the treatment floor, and pick up responsibilities that would have sat at that junior manager level. It's been somewhat successful. I would say on one hand, you find the people who are keen in ambition and want to drive and want that breadth and that experience, and they're willing to take that. However, it goes against the grain where, traditionally, if you were going to take property-wide responsibility or multi-department responsibility, you would have been at least one more layer up in the hierarchy with at least another, whatever, X thousand on your salary, to be thinking that way and taking that level of responsibility.
I wonder if there's an interesting correlation there potentially with the QES, the Quarterly Economic Survey that we run And one of the areas in there is around investment in training and developing staff and seeing the sort of the sentiment that the business has at the moment. We saw a slight increase in particularly around sort of leadership and management training, and I'm wondering if there's a correlation between junior members of staff now being asked to take on a little bit more of a managerial function as we're losing a layer, and there could be some correlation there.
I mean, what it results in, unfortunately, is you find people who are responsible, but oftentimes lacking technical skill for the level at which they're operating. You know, there's simply not enough hours in the day to make sure that everybody has all the technical requirements that they need to do their job within department and have a consideration for a broad operation as well. Did I say that out loud, or is somebody frozen?
We can still hear you, James. I don't know what's happened with I think we've lost Tudor.
Okay, Sarah is the host now, apparently.
Hello, I am not the host, but they should hopefully be back very shortly. I've been listening in intently to what you've all been saying. I'm sure they're frantically trying to sort out their technical issues. I'm working from home. I did lose connection briefly then myself, so not entirely sure.
I mean, whilst we're talking, I can add, James, we across our hotels and with our management company that operate about 16 hotels across the country, same exercise with regards to that, the layering and those and the duty management. But we've actually gone a step further and changed the title, not calling them duty managers anymore. And calling them guest service assistants, basically, just because as soon as there is the word manager in somebody's title or on their name badge, it gives that expectation, especially from a salary point of view. And whereas we said before, the gap is so small now between them, it's almost like at least if they're not called a manager, even if they're only on 40, 50p more an hour, then you can almost justify that title by calling them a guest service assistant. But the downside is, as you say, they don't tend to have that technical quality or experience yet compared to what we used to get in the past. But it seems to be the way to go nowadays. And I know many brands and hotels are doing the same exercise.
100%.
There we go. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Phil's laptop crashed just when we didn't need it to. So we are back and operating functionally. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Okay. Let's get back to our topics. So yeah, I think we were just looking at some of the interest. Now, one of the things I wanted to pick up on a little bit here was, and again, I'm mindful that actually we're going to have some time to just broaden the conversation out a little bit, just to get some thoughts and opinions generally about some of the challenges you guys are facing in particular. And just with interest of, I guess, from a collegiate perspective, the Chamber too is not without its challenges. You know, we've been suffering the same challenges that you have as businesses, and we've sort of had to restructure and make some differences, make some adjustments to try and accommodate that cost increase. So yeah, we understand fully the sort of the economics and the financials behind this as well. We've been talking about staff in particular, and I'm just wondering, one of the questions here is around to do with sort of workforce morale. And of course, we've touched about not being able to put in place or rather there being a diminishing differentiation or compression between the larger sort of salaries and the lower salaries. And the question here really is around morale and impact of the wage increases and how people are feeling. So my question, again, on a 1 to 5, is going to be around the affordability pressures continue to affect workforce morale and retention despite wage increases. So this is very much on the impact that it has across the rest of the organisation. So again, I'll repeat the statement: affordability pressures continue to affect workforce morale and retention despite wage increases. Can I ask you to vote 1 to 5 to see whether or not that is something that is having impact across the business? Interesting. Okay. Millie, I'm going to come to you. You scored a 4 there, so obviously you're looking at it from a different angle. What's been your experience here around this?
So we are finding constant challenges with our young people around affordability, whether that's, I don't know, food, gas, electric, all of the sort of the bills going up and everything. And obviously, like I mentioned, the increase in wage is obviously really positive. However, I think the pressures of everything else around them is building up, and I think actually it causes a lot of stress for them. And then it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about comparing it to sort of their PIP or universal credit. Is the stress worth it when I could just sit and get X amount on their universal credit? But there is a constant we see a constant sort of stress around increasing on food and living. A lot of our young people will go without certain necessities and struggle despite sort of all of these increases. So yeah, we do see a correlation with that.
Thank you, Millie. Peter, you scored a 3 on that, so I'm just curious to know. Is it? I mean, are you struggling between sort of trying to keep people happy and?
Well, the reason I scored a 3, as I said earlier, we're just giving the percentage increase across the board. So on that side of things are fairly good and happy.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know if anybody else has experienced that. Just to give you a bit of history, pre-COVID, we used to work a 40-hour week here. When COVID came along and we had 1/3 of our workforce on furlough, once we got through COVID, the staff basically came to me and said, look, hang on a minute. And I was surprised, bearing in mind a lot of them are sort of minimum wage and just above it. We've got used to not coming in and not working as much. Could we reduce the hours we do? And I was happy to facilitate that. So I took on a few more staff and we've reduced everybody's hours down. Obviously, we're very seasonal, and in the summer we're really busy, but in the winter, less so. So now I'm having to cut the hours. They wanted the hours reduced after COVID, but now when I have to cut the hours further, I think it causes a little bit of resentment. So I haven't quite got the flexibility there that I used to have.
Interesting.
And I wondered, when I recruit now, I very rarely find anybody who wants full-time work, whether it's drivers, they want 3 days a week, people in the factory, they want part-time, 3 days a week. Now, I don't know. Sometimes I know it's to do with benefits and they don't want to work whatever the magic hours is, which is always frustrating, particularly when you've got somebody who's really good. And when we're busy, what I'm being asked to do is, look, don't pay me any more hours. Can you just add some holiday pay to me?
Interesting. David, you were nodding away there. I'm going to invite you to comment there. I can see you.
Yeah, so 2 or 3 little points. Your question conflated stress in the workforce and them dealing with cost of living. And I'd put it to us all that, let's say what I think is quite a decent set, if we're paying somebody 50 or more thousand a year, but if they've got 2 kids, a car on finance, a mortgage, cost of food every week, and dare they even think about family holidays and things, balancing that up is stressful at all levels, not just the bottom end.
True.
And that stress doesn't necessarily link to a problem with retention, because that stress exists whether they're working for us or somebody else. The comment about COVID and people didn't want to work so hard after that, because when we recruited in engineering pre-COVID, the opening question was always going to be, how much overtime will you guarantee? And then we were met with not doing overtime. But I would observe the overtime question is creeping back. We're getting people saying, are there any extra hours to make ends meet, I guess. And I don't want to distract the conversation too much, but somewhere in this, the Bank of England are involved. because a lot of this is about inflation. The
Yes.
Bank of England's answer is punish people, put interest rates up, make it harder them to make ends meet, which then bounces it back to us because they need more money to live. And I think there's some fundamental economic policy in the background that is counterintuitive when you've got supply side inflation, not demand inflation. But that's perhaps for another day.
No, I think yes, it's for another day. You're right, but it is a punitive measure, which is sometimes seems counterintuitive, given some of the issues that we're now facing in terms of unemployment and the bits and pieces as well. Daniel, just come back to you on that as well. But that Peter's point, you were nodding a little bit there. Again, I don't want to get into this world of the young people aren't ready for work, but were you in agreement around that sort of change in attitude?
Yeah, I think like maybe it was David that was saying, we can't. I hate tarring everybody with the same brush. There's always some jewels in every scenario, but we have to be generalistic. And the majority of the younger people that we have employed and talking to other businesses have said a similar situation with regards to the challenges of the productivity and the readiness for work that they have. It does mean that, and I know, talking to other businesses as well, that when it comes to recruiting, if the price difference is there or thereabouts, the reality is that you're going to maybe go for somebody older in their 30s, 40s, 50s, that has got a bit more life experience. In theory, they're a bit more able to be part of a team and not have so many sickness potential for sickness, and yeah, just be a bit have that work ethic, to turn up on time, be more presentable, more responsible, really. So it does mean that whether we like it or not, we're trying not to. Of course, we're not discriminating, but it is the reality that the financial incentive, and the same thing applies with apprenticeships. It's got to be that financial incentive, especially more so now when the employment law has also now shifted towards making it harder, if there are situations where you are looking at disciplinaries and even dismissals, that there is all the sickness from day one and all the unfair dismissal bits and pieces, meaning that we have to be so sure and so tight when it comes to who we're recruiting and wanting to have them as part of our long-term team, and not having so many casuals and so many zero-hour people nowadays, that yeah, we've got to really make an effort. And it means that we're almost thinking about it more about using better the people that we've got rather than getting more hands. In the old days, we would say, have more people. If we're busier, get more people, not a problem. Loads more people on 0 hours, call them when you need them, and spread the work. Nowadays, unfortunately, that's not the best strategy for a number of the reasons I've mentioned. So it's more a case of getting less people, but better people, more productive, and try as best as you can to retain those people. And unfortunately, if there's not financial incentives towards getting the younger ones, then they are going to be of an older workforce if we can get them.
Interestingly, we held a Bank of England roundtable a little while ago, and we were talking to the deputy governor there, and a lot of manufacturers in the room were looking at automation. And interestingly, there was an argument that actually the driving up of the national minimum wage is increasing potentially investment in productivity, which I guess is a positive outcome, but it doesn't address some of the social issues which we're having. And I'm going to come across to Millie there. Obviously, this is not great news that you were hearing from your perspective in terms of employment. Do you find that there is a difference in attitude to the type of work, or are you mentioned before about there's a fine tipping point between whether or not it's affordable to go into work or whether actually I'd be better off on benefits?
Yeah, we are finding the attitude to work has shifted. A lot of our younger people are they're not sort of in that mindset, I'm going to go straight into work. they're looking at what for them is more affordable, and in some cases they'll go on their universal credit or their PIP. But I think for us, that what we've noticed with our young people is their sort of commitment and their engagement. Now, I don't know if that's because they need the sort of skills before going into employment. So I don't know if there's there's that sort of like gap where they don't fully develop those skills before they get into their employment. So then when they go to their employment and it potentially fails because their mental health's not there, or they're struggling, or they don't have that sort of sense of commitment, then that kind of holds them back once they've had that first sort of set of, I don't know, rejection for them in that sense. So I think what we've noticed especially is there's a gap sort of before the employment. So before they go into those job roles, their skill sets aren't there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's something we've heard elsewhere again. And I think there's a number of reasons for that we're all well aware of. But yeah, that type of intervention is becoming more commonplace now, I think, to try and assist with people. I'm going to ask you another question, which again, this is the one, David, we've already got your answer on this one, around recruitment and youth employment in particular. So the statement here is, we are less likely to recruit under 21s than we were a year ago. So 1 to 5, 1 strongly disagree, 5 strongly agree. We are less likely to recruit under 21s than we were a year ago. Interesting. Interesting. David, again, I've got your score there. I can see the point we've made. Interesting, we've got some 2s and 3s. I thought they would have been a bit higher. Peter, why are 3 and not higher? I mean, again, going back to some of the points David was making earlier about, going for those better value for money in terms of the sort of type of people.
I suppose the reason is we don't see many people under 21 applying for jobs these days. And usually, if somebody after 6 weeks is under 21, on the occasions we've had them, and they are as good as anybody else, we've always put them on the national minimum wage anyway. We might start them off for the first 6 weeks, but after that, if they can do the job as well as anyone else, we're happy to pay that. So I think I probably have more of a problem with the new legislations coming in, because quite often, now it's 6 months, quite often you find you take somebody new on, particularly if they're younger, it takes a while. They may be great for the first 2-3 months, and then you find they're having time off, absence. You go through a sort of procedure to sort of point out where they need to improve. And once you get to that 6-month period, now I'm thinking, I've got to make a choice. I better let them go because I'm not confident they're going to get back to normal. But on the rate
that's an interesting point. Again, I meant to mention earlier, David very kindly submitted some thoughts and opinions on the idea on things earlier, and again, one of them touched on this was work attitude, and around sort of the SSP now being sort of eligible from the first month, day one impact. And David sort of highlighted here that actually he saw an immediate increase or impact in people taking days off because they were now sort of eligible for SSP, whereas they might not have done in the past, and that's had a direct impact. So yeah, I think we'll touch on some of the Employment Rights Act challenges in a moment, bits and pieces. But Daniel, I'm going to come to you as well. Daniel, you mentioned you scored a 3 here, so less likely to employ under 21s now?
Similar to Peter, although we do get quite a few under 21s applying for jobs in our industry, obviously. It's not that we are deliberately, like I said before, deliberately not wanting to go for under 21s. We still will try to. I mean, I do a lot when it comes to, I'm a governor, as you know, at East Kent College. So very much keen to try and wave that flag for the younger and trying to aspire them. Maybe it's an industry challenge that we have about still not being considered as a long-term career. We are still seen as that stopgap thing, especially for the young, just a bit of a part-time weekend casual job. So there's always that challenge. But I wouldn't say that we are, as I say, not wanting to go for under 21s. We still are, but there is that financial discrepancy with regards to then if there is somebody older, there is more tendency to potentially favour them. But we do similar to Peter in theory with regards to start them on the appropriate minimum wage. And then if after sort of 3 to 6 months in our case, they prove themselves, if they're 18, 19, and actually they stay with us for more than 3 to 6 months, and they're doing the job as competently and as effectively as anybody else in the team, we then try to put them onto the living wage.
Interesting, emphasising the point we made earlier about actually, generally speaking, employers will always try and do the best if they can, and again, sort of, not mandated to do that, but you'll do that anyway, which is really encouraging. Claire, can I come to you guys on this one? You've scored a 2 again, partly, I guess. But you go for more experienced, I guess, high-end engineers. The under 21s, then, I would have expected that to be an area you would avoid, or are you totally dependent on them?
I was thinking our industry, apprentices are so, well, they're generally under 21, our apprentices. They're just so necessary. Because we have our fully qualified engineers are paid quite high above the minimum wage. But they always do we usually send people in pairs. So having an apprentice at that rate is so much cheaper than sending 2 fully qualified. So it definitely doesn't, we definitely employ young people as much as we can, really.
So is that part of the business model? And again, I think your colleague was talking about the sort of pricing structure, that as the national minimum wage goes up, that actually sort of starts to impact on the cost base, and therefore the margin that you were making on that job has sort of gone down a little bit. Is that born out of the model is that you've got essentially someone high paid skilled, and then you've got a sort of slightly lower skilled but lower paid person, means you've got the resource and capability to do a job, but it doesn't cost you so much? Or is it a fundamental part of that recruitment and sort of personnel development?
Probably a little bit of both, to be honest. We always try and take on apprentices, and they're apprentices for 4 years. So then we always hope that it's the idea that they're going to stay on with us and develop into a fully qualified engineer. So yeah, I mean, we definitely do like employing young people and sort of like champion that where we can.
Would it affect your business model if you just recruited qualified engineers direct and just put them out to work?
Say that again, sorry?
Would it affect your business model if you just recruited qualified engineers direct and not have apprentices?
Would it affect?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so, definitely, because they're just too expensive to send it all at one go. You know, if we've got multiple engineers on a project on one site, they need apprentices and improvers, because it would be far too expensive just to send, a team of fully qualified engineers or a team of project managers or whatever. So we generally like to keep that sort of hierarchy of project managers, engineers, improvers, apprentices. That is our business model.
Yeah, I think it quite commonplace. I think again that it's interesting because sometimes when you're talking to training providers and stuff, they sort of feel that actually employers are doing this just to sort of make sure that they have a constant stream of talent coming through the pipeline, which is one thing. But actually, there is a commercial business model at play here as well. It's too expensive to send 2 fully qualified engineers. 1 qualified engineer wouldn't be enough on their own, so you need to find a way of bringing additional capacity in. So an apprenticeship is a good answer to that sometimes. So yeah, just wanted to sort of test that theory. Brilliant. We've got Danielle. You've obviously scored a 1 on that particular one. So under 21s, don't see that being a turn off for you guys.
No, not for the recruitment side. Forget the temps to the clients, but for our business model, in recruitment, personally, I've always championed it. I started as an apprentice 26 years ago. That's how I got into recruitment. I think in something like recruitment, don't get me wrong, if I was recruiting for a specific role, let's say I wanted a BD sales manager to go out and hit the road and go out and win business, that would be a very different kettle of fish. But recruiters and resources, I've had some of the best recruiters, resources, managers work for me over the last sort of couple of decades that have started as apprentices. And I think it's because with recruitment, and I'm sure it's like this with some other businesses, it's very different to something where you necessarily need a qualification. There's a technical side to it, but it's more about, or it's a lot about your personality, about developing relationships. So quite often I can find someone who is a fairly young person to come on an apprenticeship, who's got that personality, who's got that, wants to, really hungry to learn, wants to do that. I can teach them how to do the recruitment side of it, the technical side of it, but I can't really teach someone how to have that personality, that, being able to walk into a room and just connect and talk to people. So if I find someone like that, I mean, we pay above the apprentice, we've literally got an apprentice starting, had a vacancy come up in here, and I've gone down the apprenticeship route. We've got a girl starting who just finished her A-levels, 1st of July she starts, and we're offering her 18k. So although it's not, if I had someone come in that had been in recruitment for the last however many years, they might be 35, 38, 40, 45k. So there is that element of actually, it does save us money. But when you can take someone on that is that fresh and there's that hunger, it has that hunger, and you can train them to do it how you do it, you can kind of almost replicate yourself, or, you can make those future consultants, those future managers, and you can build your infrastructure that way. The last business that I was at for 25 years, that is literally what I did. I brought people in, trained them, sometimes might have 2 or 3 office apprentices. They wouldn't always work out, but we would train them and we would move them up through the ranks. And eventually, my branch manager that worked for me, she was an apprentice, and that's kind of how the structure sort of was built. So for certain businesses and for certain roles, 100% I think it's the right way to go. You just got to find the right people.
As is always the case, I think there are sector variations here. Obviously, we know that hospitality in particular, catering, these sort of aspects have really sort of been hit hard because of the nature of the organisation, the way in which they run, and the pressures it puts. But conversely, there are other sectors, other industries which actually, it's still a good way of developing entry level. We're coming towards the end of our session here, and I've got 1 or 2 other questions to sort of go through, but they're a little bit generic, really. And I guess what I wanted to do is not miss the opportunity for some just broader feedback around concerns that you have as businesses, because there are, as we mentioned at the top of the meeting, a number of other elements coming into play. David's always sort of alluded to some of them. The growing number of NEETs, what's causing that. Millie might have suggested earlier that actually, the difference between the national minimum wage and benefits may not necessarily be sufficient. We've talked about the impacts that we have on differentiation, compression, and how that's perhaps causing challenges, and it's forcing employers to look at more productivity angles, either through investment in technology or looking to recruit those people who are more experienced, so that they're paying paying a higher salary, then they're at least getting sort of as much value for money as possible. There's a number of different things around the sort of kicking around at the moment, and we are sort of tackling them one at a time. And there is the 0 hours contract qualifying period coming up for discussion fairly soon. Again, that'll be the back end of August. Keep an eye out for emails on that. Again, we want to hear how that's going to impact, and I know there's certain industries in particular that are very sort of hot on that one. So I'd like to sort of invite you to pop your hand up and just sort of share really where you think, first of all, I guess the broad question, do you think the national minimum wage is working, and is it right for the government to strive to try and get the 18 to 20 years aligned with those that are 21 plus in general? Yes, no, and come off from you. Could put your hand up and let's hear some free thoughts. Danielle, first in.
Sorry, and I've just spoken again.
Not at all.
So yeah, a few things. I don't know, very broadly speaking, if the national minimum wage is doing what they thought it was going to. In fact, it's not. I don't think it's not doing what it thought that it was going to do. Maybe that on its own would have an effect, but everything, we could go into detail, but literally everything is so much more expensive that it's not really, there's no real benefit of it. I think coupled with the fact that not national minimum wage, employers and back in the day, Back in the day, it wasn't that far back, but
Yeah.
2 days, 2 days a week, you could have somebody and you might have that employer's NI savings. So therefore the benefit would come from having people that were part-time. Now people can't even really work a day without you seeing that savings. So that sort of takes away that element of it. As far as, what was the other bit you said about national minimum wage, and then you asked about, what was the
So we're
second
talking
part
about
to that?
zero hours contracts. There's another element to it about sort of whether or not, because
Yeah, no,
at the moment there's a qualifying period, isn't it? If you have
Yeah.
I guess at
That's
some point
in the
they need to
employment
be
bill
on.
rights. Yeah, no, there was something else that you just mentioned that I was you said about the national minimum wage, and then you said something else, but
Well,
productivity.
does it still work?
Productivity.
Daniel, do you want to just jump in there?
Yeah, well, I think national living wage in principle, in theory, is a good thing. It's been around for many, many years now. It's the challenge has been with regards to the level of increase over the last 5, 6 years in particular, where it's just exponentially gone up too quick, too much too quick, combined with, I think what really was the nail in the coffin was, as Danielle mentioned, the national insurance contributions, in particular for our industry. And so that has really forced our hand at a time when everything else globally and economically has caused that cost of living challenge. It has made those margins for us go down each year. So it has forced our hand to look at other ways, whether that's in micromanaging, internally streamlining, making those differentials, as we said, smaller, and also looking outside of that, because the reality is we are always going to need staff in our industry, so we can't get away from them completely, but we can look at ways potentially at using technology to be more productive and automate where possible in certain areas. One of the examples that we are doing is even looking at our product offering. James mentioned it with regards to, like, in his business, he's got the spa. So looking at potentially the treatments and looking at other areas there. We're looking at it. The most costly department in our hotels is the food and drink. So the restaurant in particular, the kitchen in particular, if we narrow it down. And so we are looking at ways that we can look at our offering, and that means even the type of menu, the type of food. Do we change the actual type of food that we're delivering to go for a less costly and less skill heavy requirement? So as well as IT and automated systems, technology, HR platforms, as well, we're looking at all of those for clocking in, clocking out, to give us the tools and the knowledge of where can we save 15-minute on shifts here and there. We're also even looking at our offering that we're actually delivering to customers. So as I say, the menus, what we're putting in the bedrooms. A silly little example: take away a throw, take away a cushion, maybe a decorative cushion. Those sort of little details that might save housekeeping some time when it comes to servicing the rooms. That's the level of work that we're having to do now strategically as a result of the last few years in particular.
And so, do you, in principle, think that it's a good idea then for the alignment, which is the commitment the government's made here, which is between bringing national living wage into national minimum wage?
Yeah, that I think is only a good idea if there are other levers, other incentives that can be put towards enticing, encouraging employers to go for the younger employees when it comes to recruitment. So if the minimum wage needs to be the same, then maybe needs to be other incentives, other benefits that we as employers get to take on that risk. So whether that's in an employment law, whether that's the unfair dismissal, the increased probation periods, I don't know, even other different financial incentives like grants or access towards help to work schemes that maybe we can have towards those younger people, a bit like with the apprenticeships, maybe something along that line.
Yeah. Danielle, you were nodding there. I guess it was about whether or not that alignment should be there. Do you agree with the alignment?
Yeah, that was the other bit that I was trying to, when you asked earlier, that was the other bit I was trying to think of. Yeah, I think it'd be really detrimental to young people to have to, I get the idea of it. If someone's doing the same job as someone alongside of them, they might be brilliant, but very much like the gentleman said earlier, if you take someone on that's a young person and they're doing an outstanding job, it doesn't mean you can't pay them more. You can choose to pay them more if you think that they deserve it, the same as anyone within your business. However, if you've got to pay somebody the same, so let's say it's £13.50 by that point, £14 as someone that is maybe a bit more mature, even maybe that doesn't have the same skills, but is a bit more mature, maybe has a mortgage, maybe has a family. So you think, right, this person really needs to work compared to that person who's, and again, I am generalizing and I have teenagers at home, but teenagers that live at home that actually can live off their parents. So if they want to have a sick day, maybe don't need to go in, that sort of thing. Again, generalizing. Then if you've got to pay them exactly the same, then potentially you're not going to go for the 18, the 19, the 20-year-old, and you'll go for someone that's a bit older because you're actually not saving anything whatsoever. So like Daniel said, where's the benefit? There needs to be that extra benefit. So I think it will be detrimental to young people. I think it'll make it even harder for them to get.
So if they press ahead with
career.
this, I guess there's because there's a number of variables at work here, aren't we? Which could mitigate or ameliorate the impact if they did go for that commitment of aligning. Could they do something else to try and mitigate the impact that has elsewhere, possibly?
Maybe national minimum wage. I know with apprentices under a certain age, like the national minimum wage, so maybe they could do that for employers. So there is a benefit for an employer. You have a national insurance saving on somebody maybe that's under 20, under 21.
Claire, what about your guys? If you were to see that alignment come to pass sooner rather than later, would that be something that you would welcome, or would there need to be some other sort of mitigation or something else around national insurance or incentives in place? Claire, that was for you, sorry. Claire, can you hear me? Gone quiet.
Do you mind repeating that again, please? Sorry.
Sorry, we thought you said James.
Oh no, sorry, Claire. Beg your pardon. Yeah, just around whether or not you agree in principle with that alignment of national minimum wage and national living wage, and if so, what else would you want to see in place to make that work?
I mean, it's a tricky one to be honest, because like a few other people said as well, it's like there's other factors to take into consideration other than just age. I mean, with age comes your maturity. Also, it gives you, with age also comes experience, whether it's in that job or just in workforce in general. And so it's unfair on both parties, to be honest. The people above 21 who've already got some experience and who are already more mature, because they're being put in the same category of like new workforce with no experience. But yeah, and at the same time, it's unfair on the new workforce because, yeah, like you say, they're going to be up against tough competition. So yeah, it makes it difficult for both sides of it, really.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring things to a close. You are more than welcome to use the policy at kentinvictachamber.co.uk to, if you dwell on this and reflect on this and want to have your say, then please do jump on the email, offload a little bit. We're more than happy to hear your ramblings in whatever form that takes. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much indeed for giving up time today. It's really important that we have this opportunity to hear from you directly. We will take this information and these examples and feed them direct back to the British Chambers of Commerce, and again through our own submission. We hold these roundtables on a fairly regular basis as and when policy and issues come to rise, or even indeed if you bring something to the table that we're not aware of, and we can sort of help work with you guys to try and make sure that we tackle it, whether that be a local issue or something regional. So please do make sure you contact them. Phil here and the rest of the team are very, very happy to work. David, you've got to go. Good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. So finally, yeah, quarterly economic survey. Keep an eye out for that as and when that crops up. That's really useful. Again, that is used by the Bank of England and many others. So please do make sure you fill that in. Again, if you're not on the mailing list, policy at Kent and Victor, and we'll make sure you're added. And just a date for your diary. We talked about productivity earlier here today. The Kent AI conference is something we're running on the 24th of June at the Mercure Maidstone. A full day looking at practical applications of how AI is going to be impacting in a variety of different business sectors, and looking at a range of different aspects from ethics and governance through to practical use of Copilot and GPT and other ones. So join us on the 24th. And if you want to know more about actually doing training in AI, we also have an AI Academy running here at the Chamber, which you're more than welcome to drop us a line, and we'll tell you more about that. For now, I'm going to finish on time and be a good host. Thank you very much indeed to have you with us. Thank you so much for giving up your time. It's been really, really insightful, and look forward to seeing you all again sometime. Thank you very much and goodbye. Cheers.